It's here. Here we go. And I'm recording. But yeah, the Pax Romana is largely due to this period of competent leadership. I don't know what that feels like. This, a state that's led by someone who is first and foremost a servant of the state and wants to look after the subjects of the empire. So this is called the reign of the five emperors, the five good emperors. And then with the death of Marcus Aurelius, has anyone seen the movie Gladiator by any chance? The old Russell Crowe movie? If not, you should check it out. Because it's pretty cool. It's a good movie about ancient Rome. But anyway, Marcus Aurelius was this philosopher emperor who dies of a flu pandemic, and his son kicks off this period where the emperors of Rome are no longer really interested in serving Rome, but serving themselves, and are not interested in safeguarding, like spending their time making decisions on behalf of the empire, but spending their time whoring around, participating in massive orgies, eating grapes and bonbons all day. So I wish I could remember his name, but the son of Marcus Aurelius kind of kicks off this period where the emperors go from really smart and really capable to just complete dog shit. And this is this kind of death spiral of the Roman Empire. It takes a long time for Rome to fall apart as a result of bad leadership, because the bones of it are pretty strong. But nonetheless, without capable leadership, the country falls apart. So this brings us to the 3rd century. On top of bad leadership, there's been this period of more warfare than perhaps Rome was used to. Particularly with tribal groups up north, and with Persia to the east, things have intensified on the borders of the Roman Empire. This results in higher taxation. And we also get a period of rapid inflation where there's kind of an economic struggle that's happening within Rome. Along with these kind of very tangible problems that Rome is wrestling with in the 3rd century, we get the loss of faith in Roman institutions. I mentioned this kind of, the bad emperors. By the time we get to the 3rd century, there's no longer this like kind of father-son lineage, or it's more like father and adopted son, in the tradition of Julius Caesar and his adopted son, Octavian. Anyway, it's more like the military. The military will overthrow a bad emperor and set up a new one, and then 6 months later overthrow that emperor and then set up a new one. So you have constant turnover in the leadership of the Roman Empire, and that's not good for stability. And most of these guys are former generals or senators, and they just kind of they're like puppet rulers until the military gets bored of them, or until they until something bad ends up inconveniently happening to these emperors. So there's this loss of faith in the institution of the emperorship, because there's just no legitimacy anymore. There's no stability. There's also a problem in the fact that with the rise of Christianity, we lose a lot of the tradition that Rome used to kind of like adhere itself together. And so for Christians, this is a great thing, right? Because Christianity is on the up and up. But when the old Roman gods and the old Roman rituals and traditions start to fade away and in fact become illegal under certain emperors, Romans start to question what even makes them Roman anymore, right? Like we got rid of these gods and these belief systems we've been adhering to for centuries, including back in the heyday of the height of Roman power. And now we do these other things. And it's like, what's our identity now? Like what makes us Roman? What cohesion do we have as a civilization? So overall, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of problems that are plaguing Rome. And then the collapse of the Roman Empire ultimately is brought about by not economics, not Christianity, not inflation, right? But it's brought about by an external force. The Roman Empire had been so secure in its borders for so long that when confronted with a crisis that it couldn't manage, the whole house of cards fell down. And that's basically what I want to talk about. So when it comes to barbarians, the Romans blame their collapse on barbarians. What does that mean? So remember Germania? The place that Tacitus wrote about, of all these kind of like naked people running around, loving warfare, living in tribal groups, this kind of grudging admission of respect that Tacitus gave to these people living up north, which, by the way, you guys wrote very good papers about. Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. These are the barbarians. So these Germanic peoples from outside of Roman borders end up coming into the Roman Empire and wrecking shop. There's a lot of subgroups within this kind of general barbarian classification. There's a lot of different tribes, a lot of different civilizations, and the Romans called them barbarians, but these were cohesive civilizations, man. They had their own language. Many of them had their own brand of Christianity. The Visigoths in particular believed in Arian Christianity, which was according to the Roman Catholic Church, was a heresy, but it's a brand of Christianity. So these people believe in Jesus. They have alphabets, they have language. They're able to make iron weapons. These are not idiots. They're called barbarians because they're non-Roman. Is where the name comes from. So the Goths, which is like a big linguistic ethnic group, which are subdivided into the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. Later on, we get the Huns, the Vandals from up north and from the east. We also get the Franks, which come out of Gaul, which becomes France. So the Franks are kind of like the early French, to be super general about it. Anyway, all these groups are pressing on the borders of the Roman Empire, particularly to the north. And during the Pax Romana, right, the Roman peace, these people groups were still outside of Roman borders, and they're milling about, they're fighting each other. Most of the time they're fighting one another, but they're migrating closer and closer and closer to the borders of Rome. So it's a disaster waiting to happen. It could have been mitigated by perhaps more competent leadership. Like if we had actually had good emperors by the time the Goths came, they might have staved off disaster, who knows? But as it is, this kind of period of foreign peace had spoiled Roman leadership, and they couldn't believe, after centuries of winning wars and not being conquered and doing nothing but expanding the borders of the Roman Empire, Roman emperors, I don't think, even thought it was a possibility that they could be invaded or that they would lose in a war against these so-called barbarians. So victory had made them soft, to quote Bane from that one Batman movie. All right. So in 376 CE, here's where the problem really starts. The Visigoths, one of these so-called barbarian groups, were asking for permission. Like they sent emissaries to the Roman emperor saying, hey, can we please, pretty please, have permission to come inside the Roman Empire and create permanent settlements. And the reason for this is they had been being chased around Northern Europe by the Huns. So another one of these Germanic kind of, tribal groups. And again, they're all busy fighting each other. Like there's no unity, between a lot of these so-called barbarian groups. They're all fighting one another. They all hate each other. They're all competing for the scraps of Central and Eastern Europe that Rome had not conquered. So the Visigoths asked for permission to come settle within Roman borders. And the emperor says, no, we don't want your kind, stay out. They don't listen because there's a lot of them and they're desperate. And the border posts along the Rhine River and the Danube cannot keep out the literally hundreds of thousands of people that want to flood into the relative peace of Roman borders. So we get between 120, 200,000 people cross the Danube River, which is now in modern day Austria. And they settle in northern Rome. And they did not come to conquer initially. Like they were fleeing an enemy. We can look at the Visigoths as refugees seeking asylum rather than invaders bent on destroying the civilization of Rome. Now, this changes because the Romans do not want upwards of 200,000 people flooding into their border. They have inflation problems. They have economic issues, right? They're like, we don't want more people. That's not good for us. And they kind of reject the Visigoths in a very insulting way. Like they do not handle this crisis diplomatically at all. And they mobilize Roman legions to go confront the Visigoths, right? And try and force them out. The Visigoths then see this as a threat and they organize their armies. Tensions mount over the next few years. And eventually we get bloodshed, right? We get a battle between the Roman legions on the borders of the Roman Empire and these teeming hordes of refugees who are flooding into the empire. So the Battle of Adrianople, this is one of the moments where you can trace the downfall of the Roman Empire. Like historians there's no consensus on like, okay, exactly on this date, this is when Rome fell. But you could make a strong case for the Battle of Adrianople because the Roman legions are crushed by the Visigoths. And from this point on, Rome loses cohesion of its borders. Like Rome, it already had, but Rome loses complete control over what goes on in its empire. Like Visigoths are free to roam throughout the Roman Empire because there's no force that can stop them from going wherever they want. So much for that, right? The burglar now has free access to your house and can come in and take whatever they want. This is a signal to not only the Visigoths that they're free, they can do whatever, but other tribes from Germania and from Eastern Europe begin to enter the Roman Empire because there's no one to stop them. So they've completely lost control of the situation. The Romans have. Now, at first, this is not like a huge deal. Like besides, having lost this war with the Visigoths, at first it's not a big deal, but there's a Visigoth king who has ambitions to create his own kind of permanent kingdom within the western part of the Roman Empire, and this is King Alaric at first. He's the king of the Visigoths, and eventually, this is a generation after the Visigoths have entered into the Roman Empire. So this is many years later. he marches an army on Rome, and he besieges the actual city of Rome, which had not been put under siege since the days of Hannibal, several centuries before. And the Visigoths win. They win the siege and they sack Rome, which means to kind of pillage and take control of a city. To sack a city is kind of a traditional military term, meaning you've won control over an opposing city. Alaric, prior to this, had asked to settle in kind of the, a far-flung part of the Roman Empire, one that was like sparsely inhabited. But in their kind of impudence and this Rome, again, the leadership in Rome is not great. That's not very competent. The emperor, I forget his name, refuses this permission for the Visigoths to make permanent settlements in the Balkans. And Alaric had kind of asked in kind of a pushy way. He's like, hey, allow us to settle and make cities and also give us some money and some slaves, and we'll leave you alone. And the emperor's like, no, of course not. And then down goes Rome. I think Alaric was looking for an excuse to, and sack he did, because in 410, the city of Rome itself actually is put under siege and falls to the Visigoths. Now the Visigoths don't want to stick around. Like they stay and they deface a lot of like the Roman buildings and statues, like you see here in the picture. This is kind of a romanticized picture of the barbarian, like they're naked or they have loincloths or whatever. This wasn't actually how they dressed. Like these are like, people with an actual civilization that have clothes and stuff. But anyway, they desecrate the city, they take whatever they want, and then they go, because they are interested in setting up an independent kingdom. They just wanted to punish Rome for insulting them. So the Visigoths eventually do set up a permanent kingdom in what we know now as Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula. So they're not interested in sticking around Rome. Rome is left to kind of rebuild itself. It's not like everyone in Rome died or anything. There's still local Roman government there. There's still an empire technically, but it's lost a lot of its power to control things. So historians look at either of these two events, the Battle of Adrianople or the sack of Rome, as two distinct events, and either one of them marks the end of the Western Roman Empire. Now, and eventually we do get the actual downfall, like the formal downfall of the Roman Empire, because the last Roman emperor is killed by the Ostrogoths, another invading barbarian group, several decades later. So Rome is still kind of lingering. It still does things, but it's not really a functional empire anymore, at least in the West. Now, prior to this, the Roman Empire had been split in two because it was getting too big for just one emperor to manage. And so at some point, and I forget when the exact schism is made, but the Roman Empire is formally split into two. So there's a Western Empire and an Eastern Empire. And we'll talk about the difference here in just a second. But in the West, where the original, the OG Roman Empire used to be, we see the rise of independent Germanic kingdoms that start to look kind of familiar to the map of Europe as it stands now. Like it's not exactly the same, but you get the Visigoths in Spain, you get the Frankish kingdom in modern France, you get the Ostrogoths kind of hanging out in Italy, and so you start to see like the formation of what becomes much later on, medieval kingdoms or eventually nation states. But Roman influence nonetheless pervades all these areas. Like Rome in a cultural way, in a linguistic way, in a legal way, it sticks around. Like, it doesn't just go away overnight. So you see this kind of melding of German tribal groups and German kingdoms with old Roman traditions. It's kind of weird. Like, the Visigoths use a lot of Roman law to form their kingdom in Spain. Like, they adhere to Roman law. They use a lot of Latin terms to describe certain things. So it's kind of a weird hybrid civilization that comes out of the ashes of the Roman Empire. You get Roman law and old Roman institutions that form the basis of these new Germanic kingdoms. Which, I mean, honestly, is still around today. Like, England is the odd man out. English legal tradition goes by what's called case law or common law, and the United States adheres to common law as well, because we split off from Britain, and we used, when the United States became an independent country, we used British legal traditions because it's like, well, this is what we're used to. Same thing in most of Europe. They still follow a brand of Roman law called code law. So it's, these traditions last up until the present day, really. I mean, Rome has never really gone away from us in certain ways. Latin becomes the most widely used language, particularly when it comes to law, and it still is. It's still in the United States. When the Supreme Court decides to take up a case, they issue what's called certiorari, which is a Latin word, or we call it cert sometimes. When they issue cert, they decide to take up a case before the Supreme Court. Like, that's an old Roman legal term that's been around for more than 2,000 years. Latin becomes the language of religion, really, and this is still present in the Catholic Church, right? Nowadays, it's pretty common to read most of the liturgy and read the Bible in Christian churches in English or whatever the common language is, but it used to be done only in Latin, like way up until not that long ago, maybe a couple hundred years ago. So I'm just trying to, lay out here, even though the Roman Empire in the West is gone, Roman influence sticks with us forever. At the time too, when these Roman kingdom, or when these Gothic kingdoms started to take the place of Rome, you still had educated guys, educated in Roman schools, Roman tradition, building the sort of the common basis for education throughout these new kind of medieval kingdoms. Roman poets and scholars and clergy and lawyers, they're all hired by Germanic kings. Like, hey, you were educated in Rome? Great. I want you in my court because you're able to, read and write in the common language. Like, you're able to help us establish a new legal system or a new, educational system in Spain or France or whatever, right? So Roman influence sticks around, is what I'm trying to say, in these various ways. And you can make a case in this way that the Roman Empire doesn't really collapse, right? Instead of being a political empire, the Roman Empire lives on in law and religion and language and culture, right? You could make a case for that. Another way you could make a case that the Roman Empire never fell is it literally doesn't go away in the East. Like, there are two Roman empires. By the time we get to 400 CE, by the time we get to the crisis of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire is split in half, mostly for practical reasons. But honestly, there's a few different cultural reasons as well. The eastern part of the Roman Empire just looked a lot different than the western part. In the West, they speak Latin. and they have kind of Roman Catholic Christianity. In the East, they speak Greek, and they adhere to a different kind of Christianity, which becomes known as Orthodox Christianity, which is still around in parts of Eastern Europe. So a little bit of family history. My family, on my dad's side, goes back to Ukraine. Like, I'm second generation American. My dad's parents are both from Ukraine. They're both Ukrainian immigrants to the United States. And everyone in Ukraine is part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. They're not Catholic, they're Eastern Orthodox, which is a completely separate branch of Christianity from what most Westerners are aware of. So I kind of grew up in both traditions, in both like a Protestant tradition and an Eastern Orthodoxy. So I would celebrate 2 Easters because Easter fell on different days. It's pretty baller. So Constantine, we talked about him already. Constantine is one of the major foundational figures in the Eastern Roman Empire. Yes, this is the guy who legalizes Christianity. But he also helped establish this kind of break off from the West. So the Western Empire falls down, goes boom. The Eastern Roman Empire, its capital is in the city of Constantinople, which Constantine named after himself. It used to be the old Greek city of Byzantium. It's a modern day Turkey. In fact, it's the largest city in Turkey today. But it used to be the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire because Constantine chose Byzantium as the site of his new capital. He renames the city after himself because he's such a humble guy. But this becomes known as the Byzantine Empire because its capital used to be the old city of Byzantium. Constantine, yeah, he legalizes Christianity, but he also does a lot of other stuff that's really important. He rebuilds the Roman military, makes it headquartered in the East, and he declares war on some of these old Gothic tribes that had come in, and in fact, he recaptures for a little while the city of Rome from the barbarians. He recaptures parts of North Africa, other parts of Italy from the invading Germanic barbarians. And so he's out to reunite the Roman Empire. Now he doesn't do it because he's outnumbered. He's too far away from Rome. Like, it's really hard to kind of lead a bunch of Roman legions against hundreds of thousands of barbarians and win. It's hard to hold territory once you've reoccupied it. So it doesn't actually come off. But in doing so, Constantine reinvents the Roman Empire to make it based in the east of the Mediterranean instead of the west. He also, before he dies, promotes Christianity. He legalizes it, and he himself converts, according to the story anyway. He converts on his deathbed. He did not become a Christian overnight, but he tolerated and legalized and then promoted Christianity. He led the Council of Nicaea, and he helped establish Orthodox Christianity before he died. And so, yeah, like I got ahead of myself a little bit, but the Council of Nicaea is one of the most like foundational moments in Christian history because it hammers out exactly what Christians believe in, what Orthodox Christians believe in. And if you don't believe in certain of these tenets, like the Trinity, for instance, you're not a real Christian. You're a heretic. So Constantine, through these kind of religious mechanisms, and like political and military mechanisms, he reinvents the Roman Empire, and what becomes his empire, like the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire. It lives on for another 1,000 years after Rome had fallen, right? Like, I'm trying to remember the exact day. I think is it 14? gosh, 1492, is that right? When Constantinople finally falls to the invading Ottomans. But Constantine's empire in the East, he builds it in such a way that it lasts for 1,000 years after the Roman Empire had fallen in the West. So you can make a case, you know, that like, when did Rome fall? And this might be a question I'm going to ask you on the exam next week. Is like, make your case for when Rome fell, if it did ever. You know, is it Adrianople? Is it the sacking of Rome by the Visigoths? Is it with Constantine, or is it never? You know, it's up to you. As long as you make a cogent case for it, you know, I'd love to hear it. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to post this on Blackboard so you guys can revisit it if you need to. But, you know, hopefully this gives you a really good idea of, you know, what to expect on the exam. This gives you a good idea of what to encounter next week. And this will serve you really well. Are there any questions or concerns or anything? Okay. All righty. Well, that's it. That's what I've got for you guys today. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, happy writing. I'll see you guys on Friday for the document discussion. And yeah, hope you have a good week. Good luck with your classes, and I'll see you later.
Bye.
Yes.